Okay, so let's get straight on with Domain 1, security and risk management. Now, there are not a lot of changes with Domain 1, but actually that's great because we can, go through the small changes slowly, and I can introduce you to the way the annotation I've used to describe how things have changed, and then you'll be familiar with that for later domains as well, where I have to go through a bit more quickly because there's so much material. So we've only got a couple of slides on Domain 1 because they are minor changes. So there's been a reordering of some subdomains, but that doesn't really make any difference to the content. We have a new subdomain 1.2 called security concepts. And here we have, for the first time, the CIA triad has been expanded. That's confidentiality, integrity and availability, and also mentioned our authenticity and non-repudiation. Now, all of these things were already in the official course. They were already AOC, as I put it. Okay, that's the label I will use from now on. They were already there, but they're listed now for the first time explicitly. And we have a new section 1.6, investigation types. Okay, and listed there we have administrative, criminal, civil, regulatory, and industry standards. So investigations into those or breaches thereof. However, this section was already subdomain 7.2. It was in domain 7. So again, it was already taught. It was already in the syllabus. It's just been slightly moved. So that's that one. Then there are some more minor changes to details within subdomain 1.10, risk management concepts. We've still got reporting, but asset valuation has been deleted for some reason. That's being de-emphasized. And then added to continuous improvement, we've got risk maturity modeling. Now, I've highlighted that in yellow because that is genuinely new. Okay, that's not appeared in the previous version of the syllabus. And in a couple of slides, we'll look at that in a bit more detail. And then in subdomain 1.11, called threat modeling, or that's a brief summary of what it's called. There were 2 bullet point descriptors in there that gave more detail, and they've just been removed. Okay, so no big deal there. But let's move on to risk maturity modeling. So if we go to Wikipedia, and I went there because there's no mention of risk maturity modeling in the study guide or the student guide. So, but if we go and look at Wikipedia, it says that maturity of risk modeling is a measurement of the ability of an organization for continuous improvement. So you recall that links back to what we saw. Risk maturity modeling has been added to continuous improvement. So I think this Wikipedia quote is on the money. So it's a way to measure our ability to undertake continuous improvement in a discipline or quality. And the higher the maturity, the higher the chances that incidents or errors will lead to improvements, either in quality or in the use of resources within that discipline, okay, within the organization. So nice definition there. Doesn't really tell you much about how you might do that, though, does it? Now, the next slide does that. So there is a thing called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it's a bit like, it looks very much like any other maturity model. So CMM, the Capability Maturity Model, was the first one, and there are several others. There's also a Security Assessment Maturity Model and others. But this one, the CMMC, we've got 5 levels, as we always do have in a maturity model. And the lowest level, we're performing some kind of cybersecurity, but probably not very well, not consistently. In level 2, we're documenting it. In level 3, we are managing it. So we have some measurable objectives that we're trying to achieve. In level 4, we are reviewing it and hopefully bringing in improvement. And then in level 5, we are continuously improving and optimizing. So that's fairly standard for maturity models. What we have here, though, associated with those 5 levels, the CMMC associates basic cyber hygiene at level 1, at level 2, intermediate, level 3, good. Okay, well, that's, what is basic, intermediate, and good? You have to look in the standard to see what they define as those things. Then level 4, we're being proactive, we're actually hunting down issues. And then finally, at level 5, we are advanced and we're taking a progressive view of this subject, whatever that might be. So if you want to know more about the CMMC, you're going to have to look at that in some detail. Now, it didn't, I don't think it came up in the exam that I took, but that doesn't mean to say that it won't for other people, because the CISSP exam in English is a computer-driven test, and the computer can decide which questions it gives you depending on your performance. So because it didn't come up in my exam doesn't necessarily mean anything. But nevertheless, I think that is a useful thing to be aware of, because CISSP seems quite keen on maturity models in general. Okay, being, it's from an American organization, and they love their maturity models. So that is domain 1, security and risk management. Only a handful of slides there, as you can see, not too many changes. But let's move straight on to domain 2, asset security. And there are some very significant changes in asset security. Okay, so we have major changes to this domain. We've got a new subdomain 2.3, provision resources securely, and that addresses information and asset ownership. It addresses inventory, both tangible and intangible things, and that's an interesting point, I think, because lots of organizations have intangible assets, maybe knowledge, process, a way of doing things, a culture that is part of, the secret sauce of what makes that organization special and effective. And of course, if people can get an insight into that and steal it or copy it, that could be useful to your rivals or opponents. And also asset management. Now, I have to say that these concepts of asset ownership and asset management are not new. They're just expressed in a different way here. So they were in the old syllabus, but maybe not so explicitly spelt out. Then in section 2.4, we have a new section, manage the data lifecycle. Now that was already, I say it's new, it was already in the official course, but we've got some more detail. So we have data roles, which we had before, but again, not always explicitly listed. We have data activities, so collect, locate, maintain, and retain. And then we have data remnants and destruction. And again, all of these subjects were in the previous version of the syllabus, but they're spelt out a bit better now, okay, in this subdomain. So if I move on to our second overview slide of domain 2, we have got in section 2.5, which is about asset retention, we've got some new terms, okay? We have end of life and end of support. And these terms describe, when a computer software product or service or some online service comes to the end of its life or is no longer supported. And these are genuinely new things. There is no mention of these in the study or the student guides. And similarly, then in section 2.6, under data security control requirements, has been added compliance. Now, again, compliance as a concept was always there. We always had to be compliant with things, you know, whether it be the law or local regulations or standards if they were imposed upon us. But it's brought out more explicitly now. So protection methods was there before, but we have data rights management and data loss protection. Now, those concepts and terms were already in the course, but now the acronyms are there for the first time in the summary. So maybe we can assume a greater emphasis there. And then a completely new term to the course is Cloud Access Security Broker, or CISSP. Okay, so that's not in the student guide, it's not in the course, but it is, you can find it on page 356 of the study guide. So that's the study guide is the black and white book, as opposed to the green and white book, which is the student guide. So let's move on and look at these new terms. So end of life, and we've got the US Army definition, because if you go and look at the relevant cybersecurity websites, this is what comes up. So here's an official term that is probably, because it's US and it's an official government term, is probably more use than, say, just something you pick up on the internet or Wikipedia. But end of life is defined as referring to the date that software is no longer manufactured or supported. So the announcement by the vendor stipulates when product support will end, how far into the future product support for the product will be provided. And typically this refers to the date where a specific product and or version is no longer available for purchase. Okay. And then also end of support refers to the date that software is no longer serviced via upgrades, patches, and overall maintenance. So end of support might come sometime before end of life. It just forces you to make a decision. If you're the user of this software or service, if you get to end of support, you might decide to terminate use of the product there and then and move on, or you might decide you would do your own support if that's an option, or you might just carry on as long as you can. And sometimes, you know, you see firms holding on to kit beyond their end of life, really until it's no longer usable, until it falls over, which is, you know, it's a risk-based decision you can make. Anyway, those are the two terms. So Cloud Access Security Broker. So it says a CISSP, and this is Wikipedia, as you can see. A CISSP is either on-premises or cloud-based, and it's software that sits between cloud service users and those cloud applications, and it monitors all activities and enforces security policies. So a broker, as it says, it sits between the two things and moderates what goes on. And it says a CISSP can offer a variety of services, such as monitoring user activity, warning admins about hazardous actions, enforcing security policy compliance, and automatically preventing malware. So a CISSP may deliver security, it may deliver management, or both. So that's a CISSP. And hopefully that description, that understanding of the concept will help you if a question of that comes up in the exam. And the exam nowadays is much more so than the practice questions. The practice questions can be quite mechanistic. The exam is much more about understanding. Do you understand these terms and how to apply them, and what the implications of these concepts are? Okay, So you need a bit of a deeper knowledge than what would be implied from the official practice question. Okay, so that was Domain 2, Asset Security.